Hey guys, today we'll be cooking pork stir fry in the city of Beijing, China. Before we get cooking, I'd like to give you guys some information on pork production. China is the leading producer of pork, producing roughly half of the world's pork. Its pork industry is estimated to value around $128 billion, and China is also the largest consumer of pork as it is a staple of many of their dishes, including stir fry and dumplings. Considering China is the largest producer of pork in the world, it does, however, still import around 40% of the total pork they consume. Now let's go over the ingredients. Here are the ingredients that we'll be using to make pork stir fry. Of course, the main ingredient, we use pork tenderloin. I like to use extra lean pork so it doesn't get as fatty. Kosher salt, some olive oil. I like to use Kikkoman teriyaki sauce. I think it's the best one of the other options. Some minced garlic, some rice. I like jasmine rice, and Japanese blend bagged vegetables. First, we'll start with cutting the pork tenderloin. I like to cut them into 1/2 inch cubes to make sure they stay moist, don't dry out while they cook, and still be in bite-sized pieces so that everybody can enjoy it with the stir fry without having to cut it. Here's our pile of pork. We won't actually be seasoning it because the teriyaki sauce actually has a good amount of sodium in it, so it will salt it just with the sauce. Usually I do add some salt and pepper, but with this recipe we won't have to. Next, we're gonna go ahead and put this in the pan with a little bit of olive oil and some garlic. I like to cook the pork at about medium heat. That way it stays moist and doesn't dry out, because pork is very easy to dry out. And I do usually like to put a cover on it to make sure that the steam kind of cooks it through and it traps some moisture in, like I said before, to make sure it stays moist. While the pork cooks for a bit, we're gonna go ahead and start making some rice. I usually make about 1 cup of dry rice, which yields around 3 cups of rice. And we just do that by adding about 2 cups of water into this pot. We're going to bring it to boiling temperature. Then when we add the rice, we're going to reduce it to a simmer, add a little bit of olive oil and a pinch of salt. While we get the water to boil and the pork cooks a little bit, I'd like to tell you guys about the effects of African swine fever on China's pork production. African swine fever is a highly contagious and deadly viral disease affecting both domestic and wild pigs of all ages. This disease causes severe illness and high death rates, and China has actually already lost around 100 million pigs to African swine fever, and is estimated to see its hog population shrink by as much as 55% by the end of 2019. This impact on their pork production is causing China to increase its pork imports from countries like the US, and possibly cause the release of emergency pork reserves in order to keep up with consumer demand in China. Now that we have the water boiling for the rice, I'm going to go ahead and bring it down to a low temperature. Now we're going to add our cup of rice. With some olive oil. I try to put just a little bit just because we don't want it to stick to the pan, but we don't want it to overpower the rice since it's usually not very tasteful. And now just a tiny bit of salt. Now we're going to give it a nice little stir, just to make sure it doesn't all clump up. So now we just leave the lid on it with the temperature on low, and it should be ready in about 15 minutes. Now that the pork is starting to lose some of its pinkish color, I'm going to go ahead and add 1 teaspoon of garlic, just to give it a little bit of flavor to add to the stir fry. Now that the pork is starting to brown on the outside, we're going to go ahead and add some of the teriyaki sauce, just to make sure that the sauce gets cooked in with the meat, and just gives it a nice flavor. Don't use too much because you do want to save some of that teriyaki sauce for when you add the rice. Of course, go ahead and stir your pork into the sauce. There we go. Now the sauce will also caramelize around the pieces of pork and give it a nice teriyaki coating. Now that the pork and rice are almost finished, we're gonna go ahead and get the Japanese blend vegetables. Just kind of crush them up a little just to make sure that your vegetables are cooked together, and when you put them in the microwave they do heat up evenly. So for these bagged vegetables, you just go ahead and put them in the oven face down. And they'll be ready in about 6 minutes. Once your vegetables, pork, and rice are all finished, just go ahead and get all those components and put them together. You'll probably need to add a little bit extra sauce in there to give the rice this nice brown color. And that's how you guys make stir fry. Before I let you go, I do want to go over some of the economic effects that the African swine fever can actually have on China's production as well as worldwide. As China's pigs continue to perish from African swine fever, China as well as other countries like the US will see the price of pork spike as the world will likely be nearing a pork shortage. Pork exporters, however, will benefit from this increase in prices as China, the world's largest market, will be greatly increasing their imports. As a result, a strain will be placed on pork producers as increasing demand will not be able to be met by suppliers in the short run. Thank you guys for watching today's video, and I really hope you guys enjoy your homemade pork stir fry.